two simple things: love God, love your neighbor. And if you want to throw in a third thing, be really radical, love your enemy. That's where the rubber really meets the road. And yet when you start to move into a place of seeing God in everything and everyone, you begin to love everything, even your enemies. So the question is, do you really have any enemies? Maybe they consider you an enemy, but a true spiritual person doesn't really have any enemies. I mean, there are people that greatly disappoint us in the way they behave, but the love of God says that we all belong regardless of our behavior. And, so that one of the disconnects I think going on today in the church world is that the message a lot of people get from the religious world is I have to behave and then believe like they believe, and then I get to belong, right? And yet I think the kingdom of God is absolutely opposite of that. It says, guess what? You belong just as you are, as is, with all the rough edges and, dirt that's stuck onto you from living in this world that, can get to us sometimes. But anyway, you belong. And then as you get this sense of belonging and loving, being loved, you then start to believe a little more and your behavior starts to change. So it's actually, you don't try to change the behavior, you reinforce that you belong. And then the behavior follows that. And that's true in raising children and in a lot of different things. So unfortunately, religious folks tend to get it a little mixed up, and that's why a lot of people have said, guess what? I want to be spiritual, but I don't want to be religious. What do they mean by that? They don't want to be judgmental. They don't want to feel like they have a requirement system that they have to follow. So Ken has this uncanny ability to explain things in big, big, big terms. And we're going to talk about that. A couple of people have said this work, again, this book is an unparalleled scope and integrative vision, says Michael Murphy. The San Francisco Chronicle says a clarion call for seeing the world as a whole. And Ken Wilbur expands the meaning of the familiar words, you shall know the truth and the truth shall set you free. He literally boils it down to where we understand what true freedom is, what the truth, and how it works from the inside out and from the bottom up. So among the many and diverse levels of truth that Ken unveils for readers are his 4 quadrants that he's come up with for human and societal development. And there's an image on this handout that shows them on the back side of it. It shows that we start in the one quadrant is the individual values and beliefs of the individuals on the internal. So it starts internally, then it moves to the external, our actions and behaviors of the individual. So if you want to change the actions and behavior, like I just said, you don't start with that, you start with the values and beliefs. You start internally, and the belief is that, as we are told, that we belong, we are good as is. Then this changed actions and behaviors starts to affect, so the first one is the individual level, the second is the collective level or societal change. How do we make change in the society? Well, first it starts with individuals that are changed, right? And their behavior and actions change. Then the values and beliefs of the collective. When you have a whole bunch of these people whose beliefs and values have been changed and their actions and behaviors reflect it, then the collective, the values and beliefs of the collective start to change. And then the final quadrant that he calls it are the actions and behaviors of the collective is changed. So this is how change really happens. Many people think just again backwards, that if the collective, in other words, if it starts at the top it'll work its way down. And so this is a philosophy of government and of change, but unfortunately, it isn't really borne out in reality. Things don't change from the top down. They have to. That's going to be lasting change. They might inflict rules on everyone to try to change them, but unless it comes internally with their individual choices affecting their actions, it's not going to hold. It's going to be a police state or something along that line. So he's come up with these 4 quadrants, and it's an integral vision of how to achieve unity of body, mind, soul, and spirit in the self, culture, and in nature. So when he says a brief history of everything, he's talking about how to integrate everything and to change everything. It's hard to imagine any bigger picture than the one painted by Wilbur, which incorporates his vast interconnected theory of everything. So I'm only going to be able to gloss on a few things here in this class today, but I highly recommend. I think this book should be in the library of every contemplative type person, because it's tough sledding, because he's very articulate and has a lot of words that are slow to digest the way he puts it all together. I actually enjoy the audiobook. This book is written in a narrative fashion, question and answer. So literally, if you listen to the audio, it's like you're listening to an interview with him. And it's actually very good. In fact, I can't do it because I'm recording. I was going to say I could play a little bit of it on my phone, but I can't record this at the same time and do that. But the audiobook is very good. And the book, though, you might want to have as well, because I've underlined it, and I'm going to go through it again. I read this a couple of years ago, and I couldn't grasp some of the stuff now that I'm a couple of years more awakened, you might say. I understand certain things now more than I did then. So it's that kind of a book that probably comes unveiled to you over time, etc. But so never before in history, I think we read this, has an all-level, all-quadrant approach been possible, because never before were all the pieces of the puzzle available. So he's saying that we're in a different time now than anyone ever in the past to be able to put all the pieces on the table and figure it all out. Before, we didn't have neuroscience confirming that spirit and matter are one. We didn't have that. They, for the longest time, have been separating everything out like Plato did. Spirit is bad, spirit is good, flesh is bad, or matter is bad. Now we come to see, well, the two are intertwined. So, and now science tells us that the smallest particle that they can find is called a holon. Holon is smaller than the atom, smaller than the neutron and electron and all that. And the holon, we find out from science, and Ken discusses in the book, has 2 codes in it. One, to bring it to maturity on its own, but also another code to bring it into interface with the whole organism. Kind of like we talked about with DNA, that we have this ability for us to come to maturity, or for the individual cell, but also for the cell to be integrated in the whole. And so there's this holistic movement that's afoot that never existed in previous times. So we're really very blessed to be living in this time and to be able to have, the interaction of all the sciences and the spirituality that's coming together to come to some very similar conclusions. So, as comprehensive and potentially complex as Wilbur's levels, spheres, and quadrants at first appear, only a true genius could draw such an all-encompassing philosophical, cultural, economic, and spiritual map with simplicity and clarity. So again, I couldn't say enough good things about him. So now I'm going to jump back over to, again, this is what I wrote a few years ago about it. Anyone can complicate matters, but it takes a true genius to make them simple. And the simple truth is what is what we're all looking for. I mean, can we make this thing easy enough? Like I said, Jesus brought it down to just 2 things. The same with Buddha. He brought it down to 4 basic things. All the wisdom traditions try to simplify this. But, and by the way, Ken has written, I guess, about 25 or 30 books over the last 50 years. And so this is just one of many that, would be helpful. So he challenges our thinking with integrated thinking and his expansive vocabulary, which is why I'm very pleased to discover that Ken recently simplified his message in another teaching that he did, talking about the waking up, growing up, cleaning up, and opening up. And so he's he understands that for people to grasp 9 levels of consciousness is a bit much. He does go into detail in the book, but since writing this book was written back in 2000. So in the last couple of years, he's now working on even simplifying it further. And so that's so his basic premise is that as we move up in these 4 levels of consciousness, and then there's another little diagram here that shows these. We start with egocentric. Okay, that's the first starting point that we all, as little young babies, etc., that that's everything is all about us. We then move to an ethnocentric. We work from egocentric to ethnocentric. So then it's all about our tribe. We start being concerned with our social place in how we fit, and everything is good as long as you're in our tribe, right? There's still a lot of people that live in that kind of thing, that you're okay as long as you're the same race, same belief system, etc. But at a certain point, hopefully we begin to mature beyond that and have what he calls a 3rd level, which would be a world-centric. We start to see that it's not just about people that believe like I do or look like I do. It's about everybody. Everybody in the world has a value and is worthwhile. And then the final level in these 4 levels would be cosmocentric. That is seeing God in the cosmos and in everything. And so he says that we follow the same pattern found in all of creation, which is that while we transcend the old levels, we also include the previous levels. So this is one of his famous statements, that as we move in our maturity, in our spiritual development, in our maturing as elders, we must be inclusive of all the previous levels. We don't stand above them and say, look down on them and condemn them, etc. In fact, we're going through another study that I'm doing with a group on the Sermon on the Mount. And, Jesus was hardest on those who condemned other people and judged other people. And so that speaks to this acceptance and inclusion that is necessary in true maturity. In other words, rather than judging the mindset of any and all previous consciousness levels, we're called to reflect compassion, loving acceptance, in the mindset that we once occupied prior to encountering some type of wake-up experience for ourselves. So we were once there, but for the grace of God, that's me, still stuck in thinking my spiritual community is the best, the only, the right. And so graciously, God's moved us along to a better place that is more in keeping with the way true spirituality works. According to Wilbur, waking up is just the first stage of the moral development, in which all major wisdom traditions boil down to the golden rule. While we may intellectually ascend to lofty life goals, the key question is, how do we actually learn to live it out? You have no doubt encountered woke people who are still quite unloving. True. You can ascend to something mentally, but not put it into action, not live it. And that's the other thing that Jesus was the most critical of, was people who pretend to be one way, and then when they hit reality, they're quite different. Wilbur says that following waking up, the next major step is growing up. We've covered this already, in pursuit of the true self. I found this growing up stage of development is a fairly new spiritual growth concept, gaining traction only in the last 100 years or so, said Wilbur. So for a lot of people, just moving from self-centeredness to your tribe-centeredness, or the second stage of growing up, really has only happened in the last 100 years. When you start looking at all of history, that's just a very minute amount of time. This helps explain why virtually none of the major wisdom traditions founded thousands of years ago details the further steps beyond waking up. It kind of explains it. We weren't at that level of evolutionary development to be able to move much beyond that. It was only a bit surprising to find out that 60 to 70% of the world, according to Ken, he estimates, is stuck at either the egocentric or the ethnic central levels of consciousness. So this helps us explain the mindless, crazy political behaviors that dominate the news. I mean, when you start considering that, that the vast majority of people are kind of stuck at a certain level and don't really want to move beyond that, or they haven't been prompted to, and so consequently we have bad behaviors being acted out in so many ways. The good news, thanks to the work of visionary spiritual geniuses like Ken, Richard Rohr, Matthew Fox, Eckhart Tolle, Barbara Brown Taylor, Mirabai Starr, just to name a few. I mean, I could go on and list many others. There's a rapidly growing flock of modern mystics. The world is slowly waking up and growing up. So a mystic, again, for definition purposes, is one who sees things in whole rather than seeing them in little pieces and little parts. So we begin to see a holistic view, and we become much more inclusive, much happier people, and much better to be around. The world estimates, or Wilbur estimates, that 25 to 30% of the world is progressing to the next level. Okay, so thank God there's a 25 to 30% who are moving from ethnocentric into world-centric. We see this happening, again, like dew settling on the prairie, all over the place, spontaneously, under a lot of different names. But, and he says this is the path toward a truly cosmocentric consciousness, which is where he says we're going. This includes a self-realization of the unity consciousness we're all born into, but somehow we eventually learn how to shed the inbred dualisms to recover, either through spiritual practices or in the final dying process. So the good news is that we're moving in the right direction, but it's happening slowly, almost imperceptible in the daily basis of looking at the news and seeing what's going on. Ken winds up his interview on this particular show that I kind of did a review of with a teaser about the other levels of consciousness, growing up, cleaning up, showing up, and then opening up. Showing up and opening up seem to have been put together as 4 or 5 levels. In any case, so this is you can access this teaching that he did at it was called The Integral Life at mindvalley.com if you want to get more information on that. So let's dig a little deeper into his book. Wilbur kicks off his book with an introduction, and this is under Healing the Great Gender Divide. Okay, if his book did nothing more than explain why the great gender divide has hurt us so much, it'd be well worth reading, but he does that and so much more. And then we're going to get into, secondly, the healing of the great spiritual divide. So these are 2 big schisms that have limited our progress, he says they're now getting healed. So Wilbur kicks off his book by offering readers a fresh angle on how to bridge the understanding and causes and solutions to today's gender gap. And it's pretty big. In fact, some people are arguing that there's not just two genders, but all kinds of genders, multiple genders. Nature did not split the human race into two sexes for no reason, says Wilbur. Males are saddled with two major survival drives, mating and killing, thanks to testosterone. Interesting. The female drive toward attachment and relationship and nurturing is a result of oxytocin, the female equivalent hormone. So he kind of boils it down to, it's not just you, it's the way you're built. It's the way you were created. Some people have more testosterone, some men, some women have more oxytocin, but in general, these are drives that are given to us. There's ways we can overcome them, there's ways we can compensate, but essentially left on our own, this is why if you turn on Netflix, you're going to see movies about mating and killing, and you're going to see movies about relationship and nurturing. Those 4 areas, and one's going to fall into the chick flick category, and the other's going to be the guy flicks. So, according to Wilbur today, both men and women are struggling for ways to transcend their old roles. Right? We can see it all around us without simply erasing them. Now, some people want to just erase them and say there's no, there should be no difference. This leads Wilbur to his first major axiom. Quote, evolution always transcends and includes, incorporates, and goes beyond. So true evolution doesn't mean going somewhere new and throwing away the past. It means transcending it, including it, incorporating it, and going beyond it. The good news, writes Wilbur, is that we're at the point of evolution where the primary sex roles, that is, hyper-autonomy for men, okay, I did it my way, I'm an island, okay, and hyper-relationship for women are both being transcended to some degree, with men finally starting to embrace relational being, and women learning to embrace autonomy. The women's movement. We can do it on our own. We don't need men, right? Mm-hmm. This is why kindness on both sides is so important. I love the way he included that. We got to be compassionate toward each other of different sexes, because we're struggling with the transformation that's going on in the last 50 years, really starting in the 70s, right? With burning bras. Maybe that's about where it started, I think. Wilbur writes, it appears there were certain inescapable circumstances that made patriarchy an unavoidable arrangement for an important part of human development. Ding, ding. Which is no longer necessary. So we can and are beginning to deconstruct patriarchy, more charitably balancing the books between male and female value spheres. Okay, but this is not the undoing of a brutal state of affairs that could easily have been otherwise. It is rather the outgrowing of a state of affairs no longer necessary. And he goes into detail on this, but the reason for patriarchy was that let me just read what it says. Rather than allowing men to complain about the women's liberation movement, or women to complain about their victimization at the hands of male patriarchy, Ken offers a peaceful pathway out of the patriarchal abuses of the past, as well as insight toward greater understanding and embracing of the LGBT, etc., movement. So he explains it in more detail that as an agricultural, when we were at the agricultural stage and then we moved into the industrial stage, certain things in the evolution of mankind made the patriarchy the best arrangement at that time. And it wasn't really our parents' fault or their parents' fault. It's just the way it was. And he points out something that I didn't know, that there was a earlier time, when it was more matriarchy based prior to the patriarchy domination. And so it hasn't always been that way. There was, and even some cultures where there are women that are really the leaders in their family versus the patriarchy. Ken presents an optimistic outlook about the future trajectory of male-female relationships, teaching readers how to value sexuality with more inclusivity and equal emphasis. So, that section in the book is well worth delving into in further detail, but I'm just glossing over a few things. Secondly, he discusses the healing of the great spiritual divide. And I found this section very, very helpful. Wilbur offers readers an olive branch to help heal the great spiritual divide. He boils down the world's great spiritual traditions and human attempts to comprehend the divine into two basic categories: ascending spirituality and descending. That is, seeking God above the earth and seeking God in the earth. And the ascending path, quote, is transcendental and otherworldly, usually puritanical and aesthetic. Yogic, it tends to devalue or deny the body, the senses, sexuality, the earth, the flesh, seeking salvation in a kingdom not of this world. The ascending path glorifies the one, not the many. Emptiness, not form. Heaven, not earth, explains Wilbur. Okay, so this is what he says was the prominent view up until roughly the Enlightenment. And so we have all through history, from say 300 AD up through the 1700s, the ascending view was dominant. And then we went through, and the descending path seeks just the opposite. Quote, it glorifies the many, not the one. Okay, the whole movement toward democratic freedom, etc. The many is more important than the one. It celebrates the earth, the body, the senses, sexuality. In the West, from the time of Augustine to the time of Copernicus, we've had a purely ascending ideal. Okay, so I got the times a little wrong there. Otherworldly to the core. But with the rise of modernity at 1500 to the late 1800s and post-modernity, the mid-20th century to the present, we see a complete and profound reversal. Ascenders were out, descenders were in. So that's where we have this whole movement to restore Mother Earth and a caring for the earth, and that sexuality is okay, the sexual revolution. So all of this has been going on, and Wilbur proposes the great challenge and goal of our generation is to integrate and include the best of both the ascending and the descending. In other words, rather than seeing it as a dualistic either or, it's more of a both and, taking the best elements of both, to balance both transcendence and eminence, the one and the many, emptiness and form, heaven and earth. This requires integration and non-duality. So this requires literally a lifting of consciousness to see a bigger picture. And non-duality is a key buzzword among the contemplative movement, and toward a more unitive worldview. Leaders such as Richard Rohr, Thomas Keating, Cynthia Bourgeois James Finley, William Young, Brian McLaren, just to name a few. As Rohr simply puts it, truth is not either or, but both and. So Wilbur views religion as having two primary functions. Okay, so the word religion means connecting. He says, first is to connect and give meaning to the separate self. And the second mature function is function of religion is to help individuals transcend that very self, moving from the small false self to the larger self. So again, we get back to this bringing wholeness to ourself internally and then bringing wholeness to the culture, to the society. There are two steps to it. If we stay stuck at just one, then it becomes very self-centered. If if you become just all about changing society without you being changed, then you're trying to do it in yourself rather than with God being at the core of it. That it is this union of ascending and descending currents that harmony is found. It seems that only when both are united that both can be saved. If you and I do not contribute to this union, then it is very well possible that we will destroy the only earth we have and forfeit the only heaven that we might otherwise embrace, he concludes. So it's becoming almost a demanded mandate that we move toward this direction, rather than fighting each other on this, rather than seeing that it's not just the Eastern way or the Western way, not just ascending or descending, but both. We find examples of this inclusive worldview in Christ's prayer for the new kingdom, on earth as it is in heaven. St. Francis emphasized the same perspective, seeing God in every corner of creation. Spiritual inclusion seems to be the shape of things to come, which is increasingly found in all religions and cultures and is expressed in the universal agreement of the Golden Rule. So that's where we started, and that's where we end. It's just so simple that we miss it, because we've I guess it was somebody said it's not so much of not knowing as it is knowing what ain't so. And so we need to unlearn things that we've had ingrained in us. And I can't say enough good things about the book. I suppose I could read a few more little sections from it. He opens it up with this more detailed grid that shows the four quadrants and all of the different things. Upper left would be our interior, individual. And so these are the stages that we go through to ultimately end in what he calls vision, logic, and self-realization, seeing ourselves as the whole. And then here on this side, he shows the exterior, or the behavioral, starting with atoms, molecules, organisms, reptilian brain, not neocortex, complex neocortex. Anyway, he goes into such detail in each of these levels that I've never seen anybody put it together in such a way. Here in this one he talks about how we see this matter and spirit being at the center, actually matter being where everything starts with physics, then we go to life, biology, then mind, psychology, then soul, theology, and then spirit, mysticism. So the second diagraph reminds us that transcend and include, embrace, inclusion, identity, unfolding, enfolding. So And then he overlaps that with the Eastern view and in Hindu view of things being quite similar, seeing these five different levels in Sanskrit. So he is literally connecting all of the traditions and coming up with his conclusions. Okay, here he has the 9 levels of consciousness. Starting with our undifferentiated state as an unborn child, moving into the sensory, physical, emotional, our reptilian mind, our role, formal, centauric, psychic, subtle, and causal. So he literally goes into, well, here he has different names too. So the ultimate final stage, as he sees it, is what he calls formless mysticism. So it all sounds very complicated, but again, it gets back to the simplicity of seeing the God within us, the I am, and we are eternal beings. So we are moving in the direction. In his conclusion of the book, he says, an integral vision. Okay, the general idea is simply that we need to exercise body, mind, soul, and spirit, and to do so in self, culture, and nature. An integral vision is the question mark. Yes, an integral vision. The final result is simply to awaken to who and what you timelessly are, to awaken to the spirit that is the actual author of this integral display, and there, hidden in the secret cave of the heart, where God and the godless finally unite, where emptiness embraces all form, as the lost and found beloved, where eternity joyously sings the praises of noble time, where Shiva uncontrollably swoons for the luminescent Shakta, where ascending and descend erotically embrace to the sound of one hand clapping. There, forever in the universe of one taste, the cosmos recognizes its own true nature, self-seen in a tactic recognition that leaves not even a single soul to tell the amazing tale. And remember, this is the final paragraph of the book. There in the heart, where the couple finally unite, the entire game is undone. This nightmare of evolution and of you are exactly where you were prior to the beginning of the whole show. With a sudden shock of utterly obvious, you recognize your own original face, the face you had prior to the Big Bang, the face of utter emptiness that smiles as all creation and sings as the entire cosmos and all it is, and it is all undone in that primal glance, and all that is left is the smile, the reflection of the moon on a quiet pond late on a crystal clear night. He ends it on a rather poetic note.
A lot of nature added to it.
Yeah. Brief history of everything. Good reading. I'm going to reread it again. So
Worth reading.
definitely, yeah, definitely. So, but again, he goes into it in very high level physics and in taking in all the different disciplines. But again, it really boils down to love. Love wins in the end, right? Mm-hmm. And the whole purpose of us writing our story out is so that we can get in better touch with what it is we love about our life, what we've learned through our life, what we can share with our loved ones and posterity. And in so doing so, we bring some healing to ourselves, and we're better able to become lovers. And that's really the bottom line about all of it. And the sooner we learn that, the sooner we're able to embody that. It's not just a matter of mental, it's the connecting of the heart and the mind. And the sooner that we begin to be lights everywhere we go, and be able to reflect the truth in a dramatic way that will change people, change people's hearts. So anyway, this has been an exciting and fun journey. I know that many of you out there are still working on your autobiography, and I hope that you have the motivation to complete it, to do it on your own, if not with my trying to encourage it along the way. If you've gotten started on it, you're far ahead of most people who are just maybe thinking about it would be a good idea. So I encourage you to do it, write it down, and you're going to be excited when you can be able to get it done and then hand it out to those people that you love, and allow it to do its work within them and its work within you. So thank you for watching, and I'm going to bid this session adieu.